It is no mistake that I really miss 2D when it comes to Disney, but that does not mean I hate their 3D films in any way, because some of them are actually my favorite Disney movies ever. Because this style of animation still presents something unique and beautiful to tell their stories, and it really shows. And I just wanted to pay my respect considering that most of my videos in tone are advocating for the return of 2D, where now I want to try and start ranking them instead. I mean, I'm pretty sure you've already seen plenty of other ranking videos on these types of movies, and especially mine that focuses on villains, but this time I just wanted to dedicate my love for these stories and what they have or what they don't have in my least favorite ones. It's an amazing journey that started out by sabotaging their own films like Treasure Planet that actually made wider use of CGI in the primary 2D film like Atlantis and the second half of Renaissance film by making such painfully mediocre stories to start out with and then providing us with the best of this type and the most financially successful ones. And I was deciding if I should have waited till Wish came out, considering it is primarily a 3D film also with the bare minimum 2D features as what we've seen, but I decided against that for the sake of focusing on solely 3D, including the revival and post-Renaissance Disney films mashed together. And of course, Wish as of this time has not shown much. It's also where I thought about making a revival era Disney video like my Renaissance, focusing about why it worked, but I thought I'd delay that and work on this one instead to really dive into this entire style of animation. So without further ado, let's rank the 15 3D Walt Disney animation films. Chicken Little is by far the worst Disney disaster that has ever been cooked up in their entire history, and it's not hard to see why. It is also baffling to think that this is the studio's first real attempt at 3D after Dinosaur, where it really shows that this was a scramble and result to shift to that style after Pixar and DreamWorks were popping off amongst their box office failures like Atlantis and Treasure Planet, which was also partially their own fault. The only reason I overlooked it or sort of liked it as a child is because I was a child that really felt the song choices were funny and the characters were expressive. Other than that, I never felt invested in anything the main characters had to say or the fact that his dad is a complete asshole to his own son, where somehow for the most part they made the majority of the characters in this film super unlikable and extreme dicks. The original script that had Chicken Little as a girl made much more sense as a story compared to this that suddenly shifted into an alien story for some reason. It's just mumbled and meshed terribly by what they wanted to tell with his character that we were left with a complete pile of trash instead. It's amazing how much I did watch it as a child now that I think about, or even I forget to mention it in Disney's own history or watching it on Disney Plus. Like, yep, it's a stain better left forgotten because of how desperate Disney was to launch into 3D during this time when they had a good thing going with Pixar before they almost ruined that as well. It's just a movie that couldn't even figure out what it was trying to do during its production, where the end product is a confused mess that made no sense whatsoever. A movie that's based upon a lot of misunderstandings, and those misunderstandings are completely stupid and should have never happened at all. A terrible story with no great messages to take away from it, so let's move on. Ralph Breaks the Internet remains to be one of the most pathetic Disney movies ever created, and it shows, being without a shadow of a doubt one of the worst sequels of all time, and that isn't even up for debate by its gross character assassinations. This was the first major sequel that Walt Disney Animation did since The Rescuers Down Under in 1990, and after the slew of direct-to-DVDs, and it still showed how incapable they are of doing so, and how just Disney for the most part just cannot even create any sequels compared to other studios. Nothing in here is remotely good to the overall story, and I, like many others on this site, stand by that. This movie is to sell you product like the entire Oh My Disney sequence and add nothing of value to its main characters that are hypocritical to the ideals present in the original film and the logic that the world set up itself. What was once a charming film filled with references to games that straightened the story is now dragged down by gross inaccuracies about the internet that are downright dangerous and will be outdated as time goes on. Like, I am really shocked at the fact that our main heroes have become way more unlikable than the main villain of the first film, which this one doesn't really have, where they just fill in those shoes instead, literally doing the same things he did and suffering no great consequence to it whatsoever. I mean, I really want to rank this as the lowest Disney film ever, but at least it still has a straightforward plot to it showing where it wanted to go and still had good enough performances from its cast. Other than that, I cannot say much for the movie because this movie is freaking awful. They ruined the princesses in this film too because because this movie is about products that exist on the internet where they are virtually the products of Disney, the makers of this very film, if that wasn't obvious to you, being shoved in your face with other great cameos from other equally bad companies like Amazon and Google. I just love this movie so much that my soul gets drained from me completely, and I really don't want to talk about it anymore, but still feel compelled to complain because of the initial reception of the movie and what it's doing afterwards that puts Disney in a dark spot. I mean, looking back on it more and more, I just see there's literally nothing to gain from here, so let's just move on. Raya and the Last Dragon is the most tragic modern Disney movie I have ever seen, with the most terrible messages that could ever be taught. And that's actually sad to think about it, because I thought the movie had a lot going for it visually. I think the movie is stunning and its action scenes are really amazing, but it's all dragged down by the plot of the movie and where they wanted to go by the trust issues it's presenting. Like, it really refuses to learn anything from the beginning of the film, with its only major source of villainy in physical form, with Namari never actually wanting to be one by actually being one, and not suffering any consequences from those actions because she's technically not a villain. Nobody here learns from the issue of blind trust, and it really makes Raya's character as a hero much worse from what she learned herself at the beginning and what her father did in a way that is more different than the rest of the ideals of the film, with characters like Sisu being an absolute annoying piece of shit who doesn't learn things either and carry forward this blind trust issue that their characters are supposed to actually learn from. But I will say, at the very least, she doesn't have an annoying song to sing that butchers the entire tone of an original story. Man, I love Hollywood's choice of casting Awkwafina in these roles. It really makes the story so good and so enjoyable, and I clearly love it. So great. Keep doing it, Disney, so my mental health can be drained to zero. You're truly a great comedic progressive company. And of course, it's not just her that's really annoying. I think the rest of the Marvel comedy in this film comes across as quite obnoxious that makes me want to die, like the quips between Namari and Raya are extremely annoying. Everything in this film had the potential to be a great Disney film with its interesting and fun side characters and world, except for Sisu, but they never really wanted to go there, and that really sucks. I wanted to like it, but they chose not to provide us that in any way with its story, and it's why it's going to go lower on the tier of 3D Disney movies. It really would be way up on this list if it had a better trust message, even with its annoying characters, because like I said, the positive things I have about this movie is its world, its environments, its animation, and its cast of characters with a good film score. But everything else about it just keeps me stopping from enjoying it with its barren ideals. So let's just move on now. When I was young, I really never cared about Dinosaur, and I sadly still don't. I mean, I really did want to like this movie based upon its technical achievements that moved Disney in a different direction that finally introduced them into CGI and 3D and changed the world yet again, but I was just very bored by its story. I was going to rank it lower at first because of its bland and generic plot, but honestly, it still is better than my seething hatred for the other stories that were listed before this, because I really don't hate this movie either, but I just really don't care for it too. I mean, also at the very least, this film actually has live action to it. One that's unfortunately making the CGI a little bit worse for wear, but still bold enough where Disney actually wanted to make a realistic film through their animation department, which is actually more than what The Lion King can say, considering its only shot that is live action is the opening few seconds with the sun rising. Everything else in that film is more fake than what Dinosaur did with its own backgrounds, and is less expressive than Dinosaur despite being considered as a live action film when it's not Disney. Dinosaur in this case is more of a live action film than The Lion King 2019 could ever be, and it's not even close. And it still is coming from their own animation studios, where this one was made by Walt Disney Pictures instead, and it's not their animation. I mean, I appreciate anyone who likes this film, but I just can't find myself to really like anything about it other than the animation, and that's sad. I just think everything about its cast and the comedy in the film is just too bland for me to even enjoy. I wish I could say more, but I can't, so I have to move on. Strange World is also very uninteresting to me, and it's once again Disney's own fault with their piss-poor marketing that has made many other films in their past and now recently in their present ultimately fail. I mean, I did enjoy the aspect that they were going for, making it pay homage to these pulp magazines that dominated the 20th century, but sadly they didn't give me any reason to be invested in the overall story or its characters and the generational trauma that seems played out at this point, and not very interesting to me. And sadly, these reasons are mainly why the film failed failed to catch any attention with the public during its release in theaters and only popular because of its release on Disney Plus instead, which is actually sad to see. Like Raya, it had potential to be interesting with an actual strange world concept, but just muddled by being a boring mess like Dinosaur in my opinion. It's still more expressive, but I just can't get into it. The only reason I'm ranking it higher is because of that style of animation that feels a little different in design from the streamlined similarity of the revival era of Disney animation, once again going for that pulp comic style things of the 20th century. And yep, the obvious fact of no villain in the story really affected the stakes and overall plot of the film itself that stopped it from being enjoyable in any way. Like, you don't feel any motivation to actually watch this because it doesn't have that actual antagonist to the actual goals of the main hero. But like I said earlier, I didn't feel like it was bad in any way. It's okay, and I felt okay with the interactions between each generation, from the grandfather to father to the father to the son, and it was nice for them to do more with having a gay character in their films, better than what they've done in their past few films to show that, hey, this is Disney's first gay character, but it's only like 1/2 of that can be cut from countries like China, because they really don't care about that other than to make profits here and there depending on the cultural issues relevant at the time. And that's a sad thing to think about, unless you reveled in the bombing of this film because Disney didn't care to promote it because of the things like the gay character that people rejected this film solely for being like that, like the anti-woke channels actually imply. Like, goodness, those videos add nothing to the conversation of interesting stories and really hampers the effects of anyone who can actually enjoy this regardless of yours or my opinions about life. And sadly, because of that, Disney and everyone else really did not believe that this story could go anywhere, and it showed despite being something promising by its style alone. Frozen 2 had something going for it, but completely missed the mark due to its various issues behind the scenes just to make a deadline in their most profitable year with the most billion-dollar films a studio has released in a small time frame. Like, when it came out, I actually protested myself when watching it at all because I wanted to distance myself from ever loving this franchise to begin with ever again, which I was really a huge fan of, whereas expected when I finally watched it, this film quite frankly sucked. It's another pathetic sequel made by Disney. The reason I rank it higher is because of those interesting ideas that they actually wanted to take and its animation and my original love for the franchise that still carried over to this day. Like, I really wanted to like it, but it was just a huge mess when it comes down to it. And there's so much more I want to talk about this movie in a separate video to explain why I hated it, continuing another pathetic sequel in Disney's catalog. There's just nothing for any of the characters to do, and it shows. It also never helped that along with other Disney releases in that year, that they really never did know what to do with those characters. All of them, in my opinion, really have nothing to say or even do. They don't go remotely anywhere and become totally pointless by the end of the story by the film's terrible ending that ruins a lot of things about the original film as well. The only interesting thing about Frozen 2 in my opinion is the fact that Elsa is chasing a voice that happened to be her mother's, and Anna is chasing Elsa like they forgot that's what they actually did in the first film, and Kristoff is chasing Anna where he's not really important to anything the story has to offer, mainly because the story has nothing important to offer either. And of course, I was also invested in how much I wanted to kill Olaf because of how annoying he is in this one. Like, he was fine in the first film, but I really wish Elsa just melted him in the original instead because of this stupid ass character. Like, I don't hate him still, I find him meh, but this film doesn't justify anything for him because of the plot being overly stupid. And yes, the ending is still infuriating about everything the film has to offer to resolve its conflicts by having Anna as the queen just like that and having Elsa leave off with the forest people. I just hate that Disney during the late 2010s made their main characters leave their main duties that they learned to grow with in the original film, all because of their pointless mistakes of the past that they never learned to overcome, you know, like celebrating Anna and Elsa's parents who did good to connect the worlds by love, but were also responsible for the chaos in the original because they were bad parents. But that's okay because their dead grandfather was a real villain, but also not because he's dead, so we could rewrite his mistakes instead. I don't know, this whole journey just seems pointless. But of course, the most egregious mistake in this entire film was the definition of the 5 elements or spirits, which Elsa is the 5th element to the ones of earth, wind, fire, and water, where she is ice because ice is water. But I guess nothing in the movie ever really did, virtually, so we can explain by having the element of liquid ice as well and solid water, or maybe just have rock because that's how stupid this decision was. But then again, that also might be looking into it a lot more than needed to be because it's actually about the spirits, but once again those spirits have something to do with the elements where it's better to be discussed in a longer video rather than right here. Bolt is an okay film, one that I found charming growing up, but actually stopped considering its other problems. I don't find it bad in any way, but just not as strong as I used to think. I mean, I think the journey for him is sweet to become a regular dog, learning to be much more than a regular superhero he was led to believe, and really like those scenes spending time with other animals hanging out around the country and cities like Las Vegas. That's mainly because I live in Las Vegas and liked how much attention to detail they actually put that resembled the strip, where that's at least what I thought when the movie came out. But other than that, I really didn't like what happens in the background of events that makes the entire story take place. I mean, it really is fucking terrible that they spent years gaslighting a dog into believing he had these powers and was fighting a supervillain, much to the lengths where everything on set had to be 100% perfect, which is not possible. Like, this is just as terrible as the Truman Show. I mean, not as bad as raising a baby throughout his entire life and making his entire life that very show, but still very terrible knowing the lengths they put him through and then realizing how more stupid it is to replace him since he went missing because he believed he was a super dog, where newer dogs actually get scared and almost destroyed everything. I mean, it doesn't stop me from enjoying the adventure he takes, but I really can't like it when events like this take place unless it is a critique of Hollywood itself to make their stories and shows good, which is okay I guess, but still not very good. I liked Big Hero 6 and Hero's emotional connection with Baymax, like his brother who sadly died to try to save someone, who actually turned out to be the most pathetic Disney villain that was ever created. It's Disney's first and only attempt at adapting Marvel comic stories at this point, and I think it really worked well. I mean, it's not my favorite by any means and really was dragged down by various elements including its terrible villain, but I really can't hate it either, and I really think it's good. Like I said, I really like Hero's journey, no pun intended, with its aspirations and relationships, dealing with tragedy and learning to move forward from that with a legacy that Baymax holds from his older brother Tadashi. But when it doesn't focus on the family, it lacks in providing much to say for its other characters that you hardly remember the names of. I mean, looking back on it, I can never really remember names like Honey Lemon or Go-Go or Wasabi, and Fred is just the most generic name for a character in a film. Like, looking at that, you see these aren't memorable characters in any way. And then going back to Callahan, you're left with something so pathetic that you wish they went for the obvious choice in villain that they're willing to shove you in the face just in order to actually have a twist that the previous year in Frozen did that actually proved that you couldn't do it at all, and then you did it again next year in Zootopia, you stupid fucks. Like, nothing he makes is ever really rational and out of spite just for one person, and making the conclusion that Abigail is gone without a single thought to what is out there or what he caused around him that harmed others rather than trying to move on in a more coherent way. Everything he does just makes him the most stupidest Disney villain ever, but never really stopped me from enjoying the heart in the film had, and was generally fun for me with its world and action, and then again Baymax himself. So yeah, I really enjoyed Big Hero 6 for what it wanted to do other than the villain itself. Frozen remains to be the most overrated Disney film ever made, and that really shows while rewatching it 10 years later. But despite that and the various problems I have with this film now that is more apparent that I want to go later, like Frozen 2, it still remained to be a good movie to me, and nothing will change that. I really cannot bring myself to hate it because when it came out, I thought it was one of my most favorite Disney movies ever. I've since changed that, but then words cannot express how much I was a fan of this film and the franchise for some reason that surpassed anyone else's love, including my own cousin who was also a fan of the film. What it did differently for the fairy tale genre was truly a welcome change and still heartwarming to focus on something different than the straight up romance like older Disney films had, where this one was focusing on the love of two sisters, which was really good, but also still done better in like Lilo and Stitch. Because there really isn't much to say to actually really hate the film other than the trolls and Hans himself, because the story is really great when it focuses solely on that relationship that Elsa and Anna have, which have some problems in their individual characters too, and could have also worked better if they actually stuck with Elsa as the villain and still went through the ending they actually had in the final film, but chose not to, where looking back on it, Kristoff still feels quite useless as well. I mean, he still has a lot more to do than the second film and a lot more interactions with the characters and a different perspective than Hans in Love, but he still isn't very important to the overall arc of the film. But, of course, he is still enjoyable when spending time with other characters like Anna, Olaf, and Sven when they journey throughout the film to find Elsa, where Olaf was used quite well to pace with the comedy and connection between Elsa and Anna in their childhood and present to realize what is important when it comes to love. and the songs, while annoying, are still pretty memorable for the most part that enhances the movie to be one of the biggest animated movies in all of history. But then again, you still have what I call the worst Disney villain ever created in Hans, that made other characters like the Duke of Weasel completely useless in the majority of the film despite trying to be a villain too. Like literally, when you know his background at first with Anna, you sympathize with him and see that he has more of a connection than Kristoff ever had with Anna romantically, being two parallels from different sides in more ways than one, but they never really cared about it because they changed Elsa's story from being the villain, needed to fill in the gaps that never made sense story-wise from what was already written down. And yes, the trolls still themselves suck. They add nothing to Anna and Kristoff's relationship, their song is annoying, and Grandpappy Troll is an idiot. Why are we listening to this guy? He's giving the wrong advice that sets off the events of the film. This couldn't have happened if you never listened to this dumbass. Other than that, it's fine, and it never really should have taken off like it had because it's not good as a story like the other Disney films out there, or ever needed to be a franchise like Disney still milks today because they're so idealist. Looking back at Zootopia, I find it pretty good amidst the sea of terrible villains of this era of films that Frozen and Big Hero 6 did, and now this one as well. It was impressive to see another billion-dollar success come from this, and it actually wasn't hard to see why, through the use of anthropomorphic animals to tell a really serious issue. I mean, not all of that actually works by how they present it to us with the plot discussed in the main characters, but it was something admirable for them to do, and it actually worked for both kids and adults, more so than other animal-related films that popped up after this in the 3D space. Because there still is a lot of fun to actually be had on this when focusing on the main character's relationship and journey that works out really well, and parodying other things in an animal-related form. That's a made-up word that I should have never really say again. And that clearly shows how there are some limits to using how animals work for its effectiveness in some scenarios that includes its terribly forgettable villain. Like, she isn't the worst one, but that's because she's only the villain for a few minutes that gets defeated by its own twist. Like, yeah, looking back on it, I still hardly understand why the mid-2010s Disney still thought it was a good idea to focus on twist villains when they clearly had better ones in the past, before the Deadly Trio. Bellwether is just so stupid when it comes down to it, because it once again doesn't feel like you had anything to set up or lead to this in the clues and investigation that Nick and Judy go through, where at least fortunately they stopped trying to do that after this movie's release, but that was still done at the cost of removing them entirely from their stories up to this point. But still, beyond that, this has a lot more to say than what Frozen did in its story department and its characters that can be appreciated by adults growing up with its racial stereotypes issue and other allegories that can be found in society in a pretty fun way, with a movie that really had a lot to say about the world with so much potential, but still not the greatest by how they actually do it when you think about the finer details. Meet the Robinsons remains to be one of my top favorite Disney films that I've had as a child and now as a young adult. And this is mainly due to my love of the future, the promise of new technologies, where I consider myself to be a futurist like many other great visionaries that includes Walt Disney himself under that same umbrella, with a quote that he used in this very film as the main message that they present in Keep Moving Forward. Its comedy is done really well, and it actually fits with the tone and style of the story without ruining the emotional beats in any way to learn from our own failures. Lewis's journey is really heartwarming, coming from the background of a kid left to an orphanage who aspires to create inventions to do stuff like finding his own birth mother and failing at it at first, but taken to the future by this 13-year-old boy named Wilbur, who turns out later to be his own son, trying to save his father's work from the creepy bowler hat guy who also turns out to be his former roommate Mike Yagubian. His backstory as a villain is very funny and tragic, tying into the main messages of the movie, not moving on from his past mistake that caused him to end up like this in the villainous mistake of the future. Where of course Lewis goes on this journey throughout his entire chaotic family of the future, which I thought it was really cute and funny and done in this really neat retro futuristic way that resembled the optimistic attitude of the future in the 50s people like Walt Disney actually dreamed of. The use of the future that hasn't even come yet really works well, comparing that to its past that they look back to realize what is more important in the promises of life itself, moving on from our past failures of our own and in others to make something work for the betterment of all. It's all simple yet effective, used through the single quote of Keep Moving Forward that elevates the story to be an underrated classic that more people really need to see. The only problem I have with it is the fact that some of the ideas aren't fleshed out like the family we spend time with, but that's okay, and also just a product of being Disney's second complete 3D film, which was really good and a massive improvement over Chicken Little that set the standard for films like Boat and the rest of the revival era of Disney to come to have this style of film that we see beginning meaning in films like the next one on this list. Tangled is a modern fairy tale classic that really changed things in Disney for the better once again, that kicked off the magic of the revival era, that captured something almost as special as the Renaissance, and it really is better than what Frozen could ever be in all regards. It's a story that has similar things to the past films like Hunchback and locking up the main protagonist and its villain, but still done in a way more different way that separates it to being great on its own. I mean, I really love the relationship and character arcs that both Rapunzel and Eugene go through in the film, working together to find something in their life that really makes the movie stand out amongst other Disney couples, which was really a nice change. Everything about the style showed how much more that they could do in this realm than what they did before, and it really adds a level of charm that it wouldn't have if it was just standard 2D, and I really mean that. Mother Gothel is also a really fun addition, coming from the same vein as earlier Disney female villains in their selfishness, but still adds a bit more flavor to that within her own songs, like Mother Knows Best and her manipulations of Rapunzel that she carried ever since she stole her from the king and queen of Corona. I mean, although her character is similar in plot on some levels and is lesser than Frollo in the way that she manipulates Rapunzel, she's still a fun addition that makes her a standout villain in its own right, and I really like that. I like how separate those two stories are completely, but still manage to make the same point to equally different and great degrees that are enjoyable in their own right for what they present. It's also very wonderful what they were able to do with their animal characters that make them stand out without having much to say. Their expressions tell everything when regarding both Maximus and Pascal, being very great without any voice actor attached to compared to other animals that have voices in Disney's past. The visuals also still remain to be very impressive 13 years later, and the music remains one of Disney's best, done once again by the talent of Alan Menken, who proved way beyond the Renaissance how good he was making Disney music and songs, because that actually elevates scenes like when she finally gets her wish to see the lanterns, and songs like I See the Light, where it really is one of the most beautiful moments in Disney history by its heartwarming lyrics and visuals that really showed us their relationship blossoming to realize what their dreams were really about. And that still holds up very well to this day as one of the best Disney relationships and love stories ever told, much more than others like the non-existent one between Kristoff and Anna. And also it's done in a pretty funny way with each character that has a lot of comedic moments to them without overly doing it that makes them stand out on their own. And to this day, I think this remains to be one of the best Disney princess story that they have ever made. I mean, I can enjoy the other films, but I really just mean that by how much they wanted to put in these characters' stories. It's hard to believe it's almost 11 years since this movie came out because it still feels so modern and up to date. Because WreckIt Ralph remains to be one of my favorite Disney movies because of what it wanted to say in the gaming world, which I love. One that I want to dive in more later on my channel because I'm also passionate about talking about games as much as my favorite YouTubers are and want to do it at a later point. Because WreckIt Ralph weaves the game world so well for Disney like Toy Story did for toys, and it's done through a fantastic emotional journey for the main character of Ralph, who is designed to be a villain and underappreciated because of that by his own gaming character. The gaming world is made in a way that really makes the story work so well and enhances the relationships between other characters whose styles are different because of the games they inhabit that really makes them stand out amongst each other and not in a bad way. And that is another element that makes their own twist villains stand out a lot more because of what happened behind the scenes in that gaming world that is delivered well without ruining the character from what we already know him as. And Vanellope and Ralph's relationship is so heartwarming and emotional to see from two completely different characters getting along with each other both as outcasts and realizing what actually makes them special in their own unique ways. Ones that unfortunately got ruined by a sequel that somehow still exists in human memory. I mean, if it weren't for the other two existing on this list or the fact that Chicken Little exists as a standalone story, I would probably have the most ironic list ever by having one of the best films to come out of this style of Disney with one of the worst, and that is really impressive to see. But all in all, WreckIt Ralph still remains to be one of the best modern Disney films in all of its aspects of meaning, something more relevant to the time of its release that connected me with this story more so than the other ones that either go into the past or its future. Encanto is by far the best Disney film in the past 5 years, and that really shows where it's also probably one of the best animated Disney films ever. The songs are not the greatest amongst all of Disney, but they certainly work the best in this film unlike any other. Encanto also remains to be one of the most beautiful Disney films ever made, taking that 3D visual style of the revival era to newer heights than ever before, and I really mean that. Everything I say about how generic most of the new Disney stories are from this era really does not apply to this film at all. I mean, I still do like the other style myself that they have been doing that is beautiful in its own right, but this film really makes everything stand out a lot more visually, with each song that showcases why we should be using this style and why modern Disney actually prefers to do it. This allows for things like the characters being so expressive and very charming, and makes the emotions stand out a lot more, like Mirabel's relationship with her family, especially Alma, and the effects she causes to her own family, where it's done very well. It's where, despite everything that I have seen from modern Disney in the past, this proves how much they can do to create new, original, compelling stories that stand out on their own if they choose to do so, and Encanto just proves all of that. I just love how they managed to make everything flow so well, moving scenes along while providing a lot of development to its characters so that they could fix the broken pieces that they have to come together as a family. I really like how the story tries to tackle the issues and faults of our own generational trauma, and the use of these magical gifts that represents who they are emotionally turned physically to help out their community. And this is all also helped by not having that expressed in the family itself, but also amongst the village, where every character also exudes so much personality, more so than your typical background character that other Disney films have, which is amazing and says a lot about what they wanted to do with the world of Encanto. I mean, it may have taken place in such a small area, but that area is expanded to another level than what Disney has achieved before in its past with its own backgrounds, and I'm grateful that this movie exists to prove that. It's a story that also works very well by not having an outright villain, but also just dealing with the trauma of your past that makes characters like Alma's harsh attitude against her own family so she could keep that magic, where you actually understand where she is coming from, and contrasting that with Mirabel that allows them to reconcile and realize the mistakes that they allowed them to grow and flourish once again. Everything here is truly done out of love and still gives hope to how much Disney can create such wonderful storytelling. I mean, for me, it is truly the best if I never had my biases about other movies, like one of my most favorite movies of all time. Moana is definitively the best 3D Disney film for me, and it's not hard to see why if you knew my background. I mean, if I could, I would actually rank Encanto higher for flowing a lot better in its choices, but Moana actually still remains to be the blueprint to why any of these 3D movies work, and it's all done through the magic of Musker and Clements again, the men responsible for starting the Renaissance and continuing it with such great films and underrated classics that showed they were never really able to miss, especially in this new era of animation. Moana means a lot more to me because of how it is a Polynesian story, which I'm proud to be a part of, being Hawaiian myself, where when regarding my favorites like Lilo and Stitch that focus on the central aspect of our own modern culture, this one takes a look at our past and the history of my ancestors navigating across the Pacific Ocean, and the legends of demigods like Maui that is a part of my Hawaiian mythology amongst other Polynesians like the Maori. This film truly has everything for us Polynesians, with a cast of Hawaiians, Samoans, Maori, and of course songs in Tuvaluan and Tokelauan, and I just really love that. Everything about its story and its culture just means so much to me, more than you can ever understand. Moana also remains to be one of the greatest Disney protagonists ever, let alone princesses that they have ever created, and Auli'i did a wonderful job with that. Where, fun fact, she actually graduated from Kamehameha schools, a part of the same class that my cousin actually attended, which means I have some sort of connection to this film in some way, just like I did with Lilo and Stitch with my extended family working on that film in that very case. So you see, I'm an expert when talking about both Moana and Lilo and Stitch. I mean, that personally makes me upset that I never went to Kamehameha schools myself for reasons I want to explain later as a story time for y'all, where actually my sister was also tempted to audition for Moana at the same time too, because, you know, we are Hawaiians like Auli'i, where I thought I could have actually gotten the role myself because I'm just too great, but that would also be too much and hold the entire story back, where I would have overshown the rock, which he wouldn't have allowed, but still fine with what we got. But anyways, I still would have made it the best Moana ever, you know this. But going back to Moana, she really is one of the greatest Disney heroes that they've ever created, with such a compelling journey that comes along with a lot of struggles that she constantly pushes against, since she was chosen by the ocean for a reason other than the fact her name is Ocean. It's where you understand why she was tasked with delivering the heart back, because of the way she helps Maui to do so, dealing with its own struggles and moving past that with characters like Moana, trying to provide for the people when his own mortal parents actually abandoned him to the sea, where the gods just took pity on him so he could become the demigod willing to help humanity, which was also almost lost due to its ignorance, messing with the balance of life and turning Te Fiti into Te Ka. Learning and growing from those mistakes with Moana, who constantly persists when it just seems so easier to give up. and where it just seemed easy to play it safe because of the fears of those around her, like her father, knowing how unsafe it was to navigate the ocean because of the heart being lost to the sea because of Maui. And it's all done through the story of how we Polynesians navigated the Pacific, the voyages we took, and the ones that led my ancestors to discover Hawaii in the first place and the rest of the other islands, really making the ocean a very important aspect, a part of our lives. I mean, there's so much I want to discuss with you all about how specifically it pertains to that part of my culture and many other Polynesians that I want to make a huge video dedicating to it and how it's the best that Disney has ever produced. Everything in this film really just works so well, even when you think it doesn't, because of the way it was delivered throughout her story to showcase those various challenges she makes, done by the comedic attitude it has that stands out more than previous Musker and Clements films in characters like Maui and of course Tamatoa. And it's really amazing how much of an impact he has around the community for being such a great villain while actually hardly mattering to the overall story, other than having Maui's hook with a fun Disney villain song to go along for a story whose main villain really isn't a villain in the traditional sense either, after all, but a reflection of something that's broken that Moana actually fixes because of her enduring compassion for the sea that allows everything to be restored. Like, you really see that reflected when Te Fiti is back, who actually looks like Moana herself, to reflect on that messages of what she represents to the overall story and the world they built. And honestly, I tried looking for the bad in this film where there are just minor problems that are cliche to the story of older Disney films, but just really can't overall because of what it does, like stories like Lilo and Stitch connecting me to my own culture, and I love that. And of course, the music and the visuals are still amongst the best that Disney has to offer, especially in scenes like You're Welcome, and I really appreciate what they did with that style and The Rock's performance in this film. I may hate him and his ego sometimes, but I just really love this energy he provided to Maui alongside Auli'i that worked really well for their characters. I mean, after all, the story was originally based upon him, but heightened by the decision to make Moana as the main standout character. I could elaborate even more on every decision, but this is just a simple ranking video, so we'll stop here to conclude on such a wonderful movie that still remains to be one of Disney's greatest and a true modern masterpiece. One that will eventually be dragged down by a remake that won't even be a decade after this was released. Thanks, Dwayne. But all in all, Disney's venture into 3D has been turbulent, but still overall very successful. Their early work was not particularly good, but have certainly adapted well to create great compelling stories that stand out amongst other great stories that will surely last for generations to come. One that I really don't think that they should ever stop considering their success, but still wish that at this point that they would create more 2D because there's still so much they have to offer now as much as the other stories. They aren't a bad thing to do, but they should just provide us with more in the medium animation to provide a great story. And with that said, I'm all done ranking, so goodbye.